I mean, you know, remember how he would have the animals on and they would do all kinds of freaky, funky things, and he would react to it, and it was a great spontaneous moment, and it seems like, you know, that's just sort of a standard now for so many talk show hosts. They bring the animals on and, you know, see what they're going to do. So,
well, and also his nonverbal way of humor. I remember growing up watching him. My parents, you know, watched him every night, and I used to beg to stay up sometimes on weekends to watch Friday night, obviously, and his nonverbal humor all the way until his last days in 1992 when he got off the air was so, his timing was so amazing. And you mentioned too about why he left the limelight. I just found a quote here. An interview in 1993, he explained his absence from television after leaving the Tonight Show. He says, quote, "I have an ego like anybody else." This is to the Washington Post. "But I don't need to be stoked by going before the public all the time." That's just Carson. He was a humble man from Nebraska who, and one reason why he was so likable was because he didn't have that huge Hollywood ego. At least it didn't show on the air. If he had it behind the scenes, you'd never know it.
Yeah, you know, along with his timing, I think the facial expressions were just so precious. Even the moments of silence that, you know, he would spend before responding to something. I mean,
yes,
he
definitely.
really just was such a master. I mean, everything was almost incredulous to him. He kind of gave you that look, you know.
He also, I'm looking here too, he also hosted the daytime game show, Who Do You Trust? That was up before the Tonight Show. That really ran from 57 until 62, and then, of course, took over from Jack Parr. He started in radio. I'm looking at some of the comments here. I have like 5 pages that have been handed to me as I'm talking to you, Derry, just of all the different things he's done in his lifetime, and it's just amazing some of the things that you don't really realize. You think of him just being with the Tonight Show, but a lot of the things he did, and of course the marriage of singer Tiny Tim to Miss Vicky. I mean, that was before we were born, but I mean, we heard about that. My parents talked about it. You hear it all the time. It's one of the highlights from his show. At the time, it was one of the most watched shows, I believe, in our programs in the history of television. That marriage back in, I believe, it was 1969 of Tiny Tim to Miss Vicky. Yeah, it was in 69. Yeah, it was the show's biggest ever ratings.
Yeah, and you know, you also have to give him credit for all of the people's careers he made. I mean, so many comedians came out, and they're huge names today.
Well, and also, you know, we give him credit, too, for moving television in some respects from the East Coast to the West Coast. It was kind of a big deal back in '72 when he moved the Tonight Show from New York to Burbank. And, of course, a lot of his jokes after he moved to Burbank were about Burbank. In fact, coming out here to the NBC set in Los Angeles, Southern California, where Burbank is. And that was kind of a big moment, too, in television to actually move the Tonight Show. And it was somewhat controversial to move the Tonight Show from New York out here to Los Angeles.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a huge loss. I mean, I remember how people reacted when they lost, when we lost Bob Hope. I mean, here is another person who will definitely go down as being a pioneer. You know, once again, Johnny Carson dying at the age of 79 to complications of emphysema. His family was there with him by his side, so obviously they knew that the end was coming soon. Adam, we'll be getting back to you shortly with your updated information on this. We thank you for that, and I want to bring in my co-host Greg Jarrett, who's got somebody on the phone, rather famous.
Yeah, we're going to be joined in just a moment by Jerry Lewis. They're just checking his audio in right now. But Johnny Carson was truly how America said goodnight, myself included. I attended live performances of Johnny Carson on several occasions in Burbank, California. It was always a wonderful show because he was such a tremendous talent. He dominated the airways with big stars and big ratings. And one of the big stars before Johnny Carson ever took the position, taking over from Jack Parr in 1962, was Jerry Lewis, who I believe joins us now on the phone. Jerry, thanks very much for taking a few minutes. Your thoughts on the day that Johnny Carson has left us?
Well, you know as well as I do that Johnny Carson made an awful lot of people laugh and an awful lot of people happy. And I have always said this, that any time a man who provides laughter to the masses should have eternal life. Maybe we'll get legislature to legislate that, but losing Johnny is devastating because he was such a force in television and for this country, and his talent was exceptional, more than he ever let us know he had. And it's a terrible loss, and my heart hurts because I adored him and loved him as a friend. And the most important thing that I can say about Johnny was he was a most decent, marvelous man I'd ever known, and we're going to miss him a lot.
Jerry, he was incredibly adept at interviews. He was so comfortable and conversational. What was it about him that was so engaging?
I think because he had great personal esteem and he felt great in his skin. And I think that he projected that and made others comfortable because of that.
Over the years, he hosted more than 22,000 guests, from celebrities to animals to everyday people to stars such as yourself. And it always struck me when I watched his performances, both live at the studios in Burbank, but always at night, was that he didn't seem to have an ego himself, did he?
As a matter of fact, he was a very shy man. Very, very shy. And every time he stepped through that curtain for 30 years, you can bet he had cotton mouth for a moment or two, like all of us get before we go out. But Johnny was very shy, had a problem in crowds, and really loved his being able to be a recluse when he wasn't working.
He also developed this sort of defense mechanism that was comedy itself. You know this as a comedian.
Yeah.
He would throw out a joke now and again that would absolutely bomb. And then, Jerry, he would have that look on his face.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he had a couple that he used on purpose. I've never known anybody that wanted to go into the dumper on purpose, but he did it because he was able to work it into something magical.
Yeah, in fact, the audience would actually laugh at his reaction to their reaction to his bomb.
Oh, of course. That was the secret. That was his magic. And there's nobody that ever did what he did before, or will there ever be anyone after.
Yeah. And he came up with so many different skits, too, Jerry. I mean, you're a great comic actor, a man of many faces. And but Johnny had that talent, too, didn't he?
Oh, Johnny had an incredible feeling for the physical. He knew and understood that slapstick, along with being a cool monologist, you had it all. You covered all sides of the audience with your ability to do that. The reason that the animals were so funny was because of his reactions to them. They weren't funny. There wasn't a funny animal there except a monkey. But he had magical responses. And remember, a great actor doesn't act as much as he reacts. And that's Johnny.
Yeah. Is it true that all kinds of people, including stars, would, fall all over each other trying to get on his show?
Absolutely. It was a tremendous place to be. First of all, to be in Johnny's company was a magical moment. And the audience that was watching loved anyone that Johnny loved. It was a very curious kind of a metamorphosis of one kind or another, where if Johnny loved you, the audience loved you. If Johnny had trouble with a guest because they were just being stupid or inane, he had a way of letting an audience know this is his best it's going to get, and they would respond.
Yeah. At one point in time, The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, Jerry, accounted for 17% of NBC's total revenues. I mean, that's got to rank right up there with Uncle Milty and a couple of others as being the top stars ever in television, right?
Well, I've talked to the Sarnoff boys on many occasions about that. Were it not for Johnny, NBC could easily be Westinghouse today.
Is that right?
Yep. He kept that network alive.
Explain, for people who don't know.
Well, remember that as big as he was getting, the fees for sponsorships were getting stronger and higher. The more audience that Johnny pulled, which he did constantly, it kept growing and growing and getting bigger and bigger. All kinds of commercials were begging to get on that show. And NBC couldn't handle them all. So it became a very, very wonderful place to be for your product.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to say.
Jerry, hang in with us for just a second here for those just tuning in right now at 15.
I don't know what to say.
Jerry, hang in with us for just a second here for those just tuning in right now at 15 past the hour. Johnny Carson has died at the age of 79. The king of late-night talk shows has passed away. Got his early jump in entertainment, believe it or not, as a magician at the age of 14. When he went to the University of Nebraska, he found radio, then television. He replaced Jack Paar in '62 and spent the better part of 3 decades dominating late-night television. Back now with Jerry Lewis, a great in his own right. Jerry, maybe it was the fact that this is a man who had the common touch. He was born in Corning, Iowa, raised in Nebraska. He knew America, didn't he?
I think that Johnny, no matter how long he lived in Hollywood, no matter how much money he made, he still had a piece of straw stuck in his ear.
Yes, my dear, I'm going over.
And you know what, Jerry? He had his private troubles, which were always...
He had a what?
He had his private troubles, which were always very, very public. He ran through 4 marriages. But what was so incredibly disarming about it is that he would poke fun of himself and crack jokes about all of the alimony and support payments that he had to make. I mean, it was classic stuff between Ed and Johnny.
The wonderful part about it was that had he not handled it that way, it would have exploded into a larger balloon and it would have created more problems. He handled it beautifully.
Were you surprised that he went out on top? May 21st, 1992, his last show. Bette Midler was there. Robin Williams.
Right.
He left on top, and he still had another good, 10 years left in him.
Oh, easily.
Were you surprised he did that?
No, I wasn't surprised because Johnny found great peace and wonderful solace in being reclusive. He and his wife had the best time together. And if you saw the two of them together, you would see the beauty of that love affair, and you would see the relaxation in Johnny's face. It was just, the strain was gone, the pressure of that kind of a show that brought those kinds of millions and millions and millions of dollars to the network. That's pressure. I don't care how good you are. I don't care what you do about it. The pressure will take over sooner or later.
Over those 30 years, how many
My
times?
God. Remember, he started in the first year, I think he had a dog commercial, and that was it. When he went off the air, I guarantee you there was a lineup of some 30 or 40 very big companies that were trying desperately to get one shot with Carson.
Yeah. How many times during the 3 decades that he hosted The Tonight Show, Jerry, were you on? And tell us some experiences.
Well, I did 17 shots with Johnny in the 30 years. Then I took over the show for 4 weeks and hosted it in New York. And every night that I hosted the show, I got a call from Johnny, and he had the most fun with me. He'd get me before airtime, and he'd say, "Don't louse up the store. Take care of business," and things like that, all through the 4 weeks. And I had the best time holding down that spot.
Did you take a different approach?
Well, you're in another man's turf. You have to respect the show he's got, and you can't do anything to disrupt the pattern of the program. But I get nuts wherever I am.
Yeah.
And it was okay as long as you stay within that parameter.
Jerry Lewis, you are one of the world's great comedians, and we appreciate your insight. If we can indulge just a few more minutes, we're facing a hard break here. We're going to pause and take a commercial break in a moment. Love to talk to you just a bit more about the great legacy of Johnny Carson, the king of late-night talk shows, has passed away.
And we'll have much more in this continuing coverage. Again, Johnny Carson died at the age of 79, his family by his side from emphysema. Again, we'll have much more coming up.
Welcome back to Fox News Live. In case you're just now joining us, legendary television entertainer Johnny Carson, the host of The Tonight Show for nearly 30 years, has passed away at the age of 79. He dominated the ratings throughout those years, and joining us once again on the telephone with his reflections, great in his own right, Jerry Lewis. Jerry, I know you've got to catch a plane in a couple of minutes. We'll make it quick, but one of the things you pointed out is that Johnny Carson was a great monologist. The monologue that he opened the show with every night was appointment viewing. My parents, I was a teenager at the time in the early 60s, my parents wouldn't allow me. I would sneak downstairs when they went to bed and I would tune in just to watch the monologue, and us kids would talk about it at school. Did he do it differently than anybody ever before him?
Johnny?
Yes.
Did he do what he did differently?
No, the monologue that he did at the beginning of the show.
Well,
yeah.
Johnny was he was very clear about his point of view in terms of politics, and he was also clear that the monologue, though it needed to be laughter and funny, it could also contain meaningful things. So he wouldn't take anything inane or trite and play with that. He had a very, very classy point of view, and if it was on his show, he meant for it to be totally excellent. Mm-hmm. So he was a taskmaster of seeing that monologue's current, it was up to date, and that he had fun with it, and that it could be played with without offending anyone or anything. He was very conscious of that.
You mentioned that you filled in for him for the better part of 4 weeks
right.
at one point in time.
Yep.
The shows that I attended live in Burbank were live to tape. I don't think they ever had any do-overs. They used to tape it at 5 o'clock.
Right.
And then it would run, obviously, late night.
Right.
But I mean, that was essentially live. I don't think they ever stopped down if he screwed up or anything like that. What is that like, night after night, to do a live show like that, especially to do a monologue?
And particularly since his rule for that show was no retaping unless there was a very, very large technical glitch. Were it not that, no retaping. So he was doing everything on that moment, at the moment we received it on television. And that was part of the pressure.
Jerry, I know you've got to catch a plane. Your reflections, as we say goodbye to you here, your reflections on the life and the legend of Johnny Carson.
And we loved him very much, and he gave a lot of love to us.
Jerry Lewis, many thanks, sir, for being with us. We appreciate your thoughts.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And now we want to go to Johnny Carson's last monologue, which was back in 1992. It was a huge show. Some of the guests on there were Bette Midler, Robin Williams were his final guests. The show apparently had huge ratings, an audience of 50 million people. So again, this is Johnny Carson's monologue from his last show back in 1992. Let's take a listen.
I'm going to have to be very honest with you. I don't know if I can take another night of this. Oh, thank you. That's I don't know what to say. You're sure you're in a good mood? You've been outside 12 hours with a thermos of margaritas. I looked out and saw a little light. Did you see this going on in front of the building out here? It's like a circus out there. There are two mimes and an Elvis impersonator working in the line out here. I looked out and the guy was trying to assemble a barbecue grill out there. Well, anyway, it's almost over. You know what? I feel like a chicken. And the Colonel is whipping up those 11 herbs and spices. All we have is tonight and tomorrow, and go on. God, I haven't used that line since World War II. Yes, my dear, I'm going overseas. You betcha. Look, it's not like we're not going to ever see each other again. I mean, we're still on from Memorial Day, my place, 2 o'clock, right? Did you know, our leaving is already causing a ripple effect. Today I saw Jim Fowler and a boa constrictor in the unemployment line waiting to get in. But anyway, General Electric, the conglomerate with a heart, took me for my final dinner, the final dinner before the show. They wanted to get to Coco's early before the prices changed. Any Brown supporters here? I'm talking Murphy Brown. Well, let's go to the news and see if Dan Quayle has condemned the lifestyle of Urkel on Family Matters.
Sad news to share with you today. Comedian and TV legend Johnny Carson dies at the age of 79 from emphysema. He had apparently been suffering from that for a while now. His nephew tells us that he died in his home with his family by his side. So again, TV legend Johnny Carson has died at the age of 79. He will be remembered for just being a legendary entertainer. And in fact, with more on his life, let's go to Bill McCuddy, who has an obit.
He was how America said goodnight. For 30 years, Johnny Carson dominated the air with big stars and big ratings.
I figured if I was going to present myself as a virgin to anyone, it should be you.
John William Carson was born on October 23, 1925 in Corning, Iowa, but he was raised in Nebraska. He began his career at age 14 with a magic act called the Great Carsoni. It was while he attended the University of Nebraska that Johnny started in radio. That paved the way to television, working with such greats as Red Skelton and Jack Parr.
Hi there. This is your host, Johnny Colorless, neutral, neat, not too bright, a real loser, Carson.
On October 1st, 1962, Carson would succeed Parr on The Tonight Show. Ed McMahon was there from the very beginning, and the laughs continued for decades.
How does the duck go?
Ask him the duck again.
The duck. Quack, quack, duck. How does the wolf go? Karnak is attempting to divine an answer while you're sitting here giggling. May I have silence, please?
Yes. You've had it many times before.
And then there were the classic moments.
Out in town, through the window, by the window, that is where I'll be. Come to town, through the tulips, with me.
In 1972, the show moved from New York to Burbank. Everyone who was anyone appeared with Johnny, catapulting many people to stardom.
Top 10 things I am grateful Johnny Carson for. Number 2, helped me get my talk show license.
Over the years, Johnny hosted over 22,000 guests, from celebrities to animals to everyday people.
Now, these are all the individuals.
These are some of the faces that I first started to see.
Uh-huh.
This,
we're going to get a camera over here. So I don't really want to handle this because they could break, couldn't they? Now, that would be it's a dog. It's a dog.
An angry dog or an angry bear?
Kind of like a beagle.
All right.
Okay.
Look at this one, Johnny.
No. No, I didn't.
Carson was the Hollywood star with Middle America magic.
Okay, I'll show you how to make a coin disappear. All right? All right, and we got, you see this? That's a quarter, right?
Yes.
Now, if I take it and hold it, and I give it to you, would you hold it for me?
Yes.
Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Now, watch very carefully. Okay, here it is. And you hold it.
You meant to really disappear.
What? How do I make it you get married?
Johnny's private troubles often became public, like his bouts with booze and his 4 marriages. At times, The Tonight Show accounted for 17% of NBC's total revenues. But even when the ratings plunged and it looked like Jay Leno would replace him, Carson stayed loyal to his network.
I don't think that NBC owes me anything or I owe NBC anything. It's just a business arrangement.
But despite his popularity, Carson called it quits while he was on top.
I can't believe it. The last guest, the last fool, Mr. Carson, will have to suffer gladly. You are the wind beneath my wings.
May 21st, 1992, his last show with guests, Robin Williams and Bette Midler.
Sorry.
And then the next night, his final show, a poignant tribute of clips and behind-the-scenes peeks. A classy way to say goodbye.
You people watching, I can only tell you that it has been an honor and a privilege to come into your homes all these years and entertain you. And I hope when I find something that I want to do and I think you will like and come back, that you'll be as gracious in inviting me into your home as you have been. I bid you a very heartfelt good night.
After that, Carson pretty much stayed out of the public eye, occasionally being spotted at tennis matches.
Anybody would be delighted to have him before breakfast, after breakfast, up against Oprah, late night. If you want the Johnny Carson channel on cable, he could do that.
But in March of '99, Johnny's health forced him back into the spotlight. A quadruple bypass surgery, the prognosis, a complete recovery.
I don't think there was a dry eye in America that night when Bette Midler sang that song. And Johnny Carson was so very funny to the very end. He said, I'm going to take that applause sign and take it home and put it in my bedroom. He also said something else that I thought was wonderful. And let me just quote here. And so it has come to this. I am one of the lucky people in the world. I found something I always wanted to do, and I've enjoyed every single minute.
And it's so obvious.
Yeah.
I mean, he was so funny, such a natural. And you could see as he was just doing the jokes, he was trying them out and kind of easy with it, and you know, whatever happens, happens. But just a genuine, just great person, you could just see. And even though they say that he was a recluse, you know, when he wasn't on air, it's incredible how he was when he was in front of people. And they say he had about 22,000 people a night. Just absolutely incredible.
The show started, obviously, with Steve Martin, Jack Parr. Then he took over in 1962 in New York. It went out to Southern California, Burbank, Los Angeles area, and that's where we find our own Adam Housley, who is standing by with more on the life of the great entertainer, Johnny Carson, who has died at the age of 79. Adam?
Greg, that quote you just read came from his final show back in May of 1992, and after that show, really, he became reclusive. In fact, as Jerry Lewis said, one of his longtime friends and a man who actually filled in as host for Johnny Carson back in 1980 during a contract dispute. As Jerry Lewis said on our show earlier this hour, he says that Johnny Carson enjoyed being reclusive because he relaxed. The strain and stress was gone from his face, and that's probably one of the reasons why we really haven't seen him since 1992. There's only been a couple of interviews. In fact, in 1993, in a Washington Post article, he says, I have an ego like anybody else, but I don't need to be stoked by going before the public all the time. And in 2002, he told Esquire magazine, the reason I really don't go back or do interviews is I just let the work speak for itself. And his work, of course, really does speak for itself. His CDs and DVDs are still very well they still sell very well, I should say, in stores throughout the country. We do know that he passed away this morning here in Los Angeles. He was 79 years old. Of course, he'd been living since his retirement in Malibu with his wife Alexis. He'd done some traveling, done some tennis, spent some time with Barry Diller and NBC executive Bob Wright. This morning, his nephew told the Associated Press that Mr. Carson passed away peacefully early Sunday morning. He was surrounded by his family, whose loss will be immeasurable. There will be no memorial service. Again, that coming from his nephew this morning. There have been a lot of quiet comments coming out of Hollywood thus far, being a Sunday morning out here and still being somewhat early, but you can bet there will be reaction throughout the day and tomorrow. We, of course, are working on that reaction for you, including some of the most famous people that were on his show, everybody from Doc Severinsen, of course, to Ed McMahon. Guys?
Owsley, thanks very much.
All right, and we want to talk to now another TV comedian legend, Phyllis Diller, who is on the phone with us. And Ms. Diller, just tell us, what is your reaction to this? What are your reflections?
Well, my first reaction, of course, was to cry, because he was such a darling guy, and I don't think his work will ever be touched for quality the way he did the Tonight Show. I mean, for quality the way he did the Tonight Show. I mean, I loved Jay Leno too, and Letterman, and the late night guys, but Johnny had a special genius. He was nice to children and nice to old ladies, and he still had a little bit of a highbrow tone to the show, in that he had authors and book writers and things like that.
And you know, you say that he had a special genius. Tell us, what was that really all about?
Well, he could get more laughs with one look.
Yes, that's what I was talking about, the expressions.
Well, he was just simply a born comic. And let's face it, he started in show business very young as a magician, and he never gave up his love of magic. He loved to throw it in whenever he could. And what he did was pure magic when it comes to comedy.
Tell us how he has really paved the way for others and set the standard for comedians today, even though we acknowledge that he's really in a class by himself.
He's what?
Tell us how he's set the standard and really paved the way for late-night comedians, even though he's in a class all by himself.
Oh, well, the thing is, when he had show, it was still a discovery show for new talent. You don't see much new talent shown off on the late-night shows now. It was still an open market there, which I like, because it was a fine place for new comics to get a little exposure and get known. But he had more of an open door than there is now.
Yeah, you know, it's funny that you should say that, because as you were talking, I'm thinking he was very generous, whereas today it's kind of very much all about that particular person who's hosting the show.
Oh, that's right, and I miss that old openness. And he was, in other words, as you say, the word is generous. Sometimes I wonder if they don't want competition. And I always love to see new people given a chance.
Yeah, and when we think about that, I mean, you see over the years, I mean, Letterman obviously was on there, Leno, just so many people.
Well, they all owed him.
They absolutely do. You know, it's interesting because he went on the air with the show in '62 before I was born. And a lot of times when comedians stay on the air for quite a long time, 30 years as he did, they grow stale. But I have to tell you that in the 80s and the 90s, I started watching him and he was hysterical. For my generation, he was very
you
funny.
Know why? He was the last word. I mean, he kept up to date and ahead. I mean, how many people do you know, if they're going to travel in Russia, learn Russian?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to travel in France, he learned France. If he's going to go to India, he learns there. I mean, right away, you begin to understand that he was a genius in many ways and in many fields, and a hard worker. Another thing, he entered into the very texture of the show always. In other words, he worked out and kept himself in top physical condition so that he could physical things. And you know, people forget that.
You know, Ms. Diller, I don't want to forget the point that you are a friend of he was like in his personal life.
Well, he was. I totally understand his wanting to be alone and not deal with people and a lot of public, because he was so saturated with, and that's why he loved to go to France, because he really wasn't known in France. and he could walk down the street without being accosted.
So this very popular man craved anonymity when he wasn't working.
In a way, he craved a little rest and peace and quiet. Anonymity, he could only find it in certain countries, of course.
Any experiences from working with him that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I felt that we had a sort of a little inside, a little funny little rapport, because he used to confide in me things that were never made public, and I was very proud of that. And I will never forget one time in particular when we worked together so well, where he just kept feeding me the proper things to make it work. Again, here we have comic generosity.
Absolutely. Phyllis Diller, comedian and legend in her own right. We thank you so much for your thoughts about the passing of Johnny Carson. And we're looking at aerials right now, live pictures out of California of Johnny Carson's home, the last home I believe that he lived in, as we wait for word and reaction out of California. The Hollywood residents are just waking up now and learning of this very sad news that Johnny Carson has passed at the age of 79 from emphysema, and we're looking again at a live picture of his home in California, his Malibu home.
He dominated late night for 30 years, and he made a lot of careers. He also, I guess you could say, saved some careers, including that of a guy who went on to become President of the United States. You may recall this back in 1988. Bill Clinton delivered the nominating speech for Michael Dukakis at the Democratic Convention, and he went way too long. People kind of started booing and chanting for him to get off the podium, and it was just a mess for Bill Clinton, and many people said that was the end of his presidential aspirations. Well, the next night, he appears on Johnny Carson's program, and with self-deprecating jokes and, you know, playing a little bit of his saxophone with Doc Severinsen, he resurrected his career. In fact, one network said that was the fastest turnaround in political history. And as Jerry Lewis, who was with us a short time ago, said, you know, if Johnny liked you, the audience liked you, and that night it was clear Johnny liked Bill Clinton, who went on to become President of the United States. Well, if you're that powerful as Johnny Carson was, you need a few lawyers in your back pocket, and one of them was our own correspondent Jamie Colby, also a lawyer who was an attorney for The Tonight Show for several years. She joins us now on the telephone. Jamie, what was he like?
You know, the one thing I can tell you, Greg, is that he was just like all of us, and he, in his head, believed that he was like all of us. And so while you saw that bigger-than-life image on screen, someone who could make you laugh, as you were saying earlier, just by an expression, deep down inside, he was laughing with us. And he gave so many people a chance, not only at the time that I was the attorney for The Tonight Show and working with Carson Productions. You remember The Big Chill, and he had so many things going on, Johnny. He was giving David Letterman a chance. It was like Dave, you know, at The Tonight Show, and he at that point wasn't really that known, and he gave me a chance too. Imagine, Greg, you know, graduating from law school and your first job is working for Johnny Carson and The Tonight Show. And just getting to know him as a person, I'm so sad to hear this news. He was, no doubt, a chain smoker. He was someone, though, that worked so hard to be physically fit. He was an incredible tennis player, someone that worked out religiously, someone that lived a good life, and someone who made all of us laugh. He definitely set the standard, and it was such a privilege to work with him and to know him. And I can tell you things like he would always know the name of my secretary and her children. You know, he didn't have to come into the office and be that down to earth, but he was. Yet at the same time, he was incredibly nervous and shy off camera, overly shy. But when the camera lit up, it was magic, and I was there almost every night at The Tonight Show to see him entertain us and to make guests feel welcome. At the time, David Letterman and Bill Cosby were regulars, and then giving a chance to Joan Rivers, you know, to be the permanent guest host. That was the era that I was there, and I'm so sad to hear the news. You know, I'm on my way to do some storm coverage, and I'm really sad to hear this because there will never be another Johnny.
Yeah, he had no enemies, I think it's fair to say, only admirers and friends. He was so beloved. But you were in the workplace with him. He seemed to make it look so easy, but I suspect there was a lot of work that went into it. Talk to us about his sort of work habits when he would come in. I know that he had a fairly large staff that assisted him with some of his jokes, but I also am understanding that he came up with a lot of his own quips.
And, you know, at the same time that he had a large staff, he had a very small group of people that he trusted. At the time, the attorney, Henry Bushkin, that I worked with, the bombastic Bushkin, as Johnny used to joke, was one of his trusted people. Freddie DeCordova, who was the producer of the show, was someone that Johnny held very near and dear at the time. And there was a staff of writers, you know, Peter LaSalle and other people that he really relied on. But he was a brilliant businessman, and at the time he was expanding into multiple picture deals, one of which was The Big Chill. He was working on other projects, station ownership. He saw the big picture, Greg, but his ownership. He saw the big picture, Greg, but his responsibility was getting into that chair every night and making America smile with some of the funny antics. He was hysterical, but you know what I think his enemy was? His confidence. Mm-hmm. He was very, very shy. And when we would go out into different places, whether it was a restaurant or a meeting outside of his being on camera, it was very difficult for him. Now, would you believe that? You wouldn't believe that from someone who was so on air with so much pizzazz.
Yeah, isn't it amazing? Jamie Colby, thanks very much. Stand by if you would. Let's bring into this conversation now our entertainment guru, Bill McCuddy. Bill?
Well, guys, I mean, what do you say? The king is dead. The man who established late-night television and comedy, who said that he was better than birth control pills for a nation that went to bed watching his monologue, has passed. And this is a devastating day. I won't stay on a personal note too long. I've sat, as you mentioned earlier, Greg, in that studio when Johnny was taping a show, and I've seen what the charisma the man had in person, and I have dreaded since I became an entertainment reporter 10 years ago this very day, because this is the guy, having done a little stand-up comedy myself, that everyone in that world absolutely worshipped along with the rest of the country. He gave his start and restart to so many great comics. We mentioned Joan Rivers a moment ago. Rodney Dangerfield relaunched his career on The Tonight Show. And so many comics, including David Steinberg and David Brenner, Burt Reynolds, who was often a fill-in for Johnny at times when his career, Burt's, was flailing. Absolutely, the door was always open to so many people who became famous just for being on The Tonight Show. You guys are too young to remember, but there were people like, well, Orson Bean is a great example of a guy who just came on and just told great stories. And Johnny loved Orson. Johnny loved people like Monty Rock III, a guy who used to be a hairdresser and came on and was just entertaining, didn't have anything to plug or anything to do necessarily. Johnny just recognized that these were interesting people, and he would let them go and perform.
And, you know, Bill, I was talking to Phil Stiller just a few moments ago about this, his comedic generosity. Why don't we see that today?
Well, for one thing, he wasn't as interested in getting the laugh as making sure the guest got the laugh. And I think that was important. He knew the next day, he always would say he would rather that someone would wake up and go to the water cooler the next day and say, "Did you hear what happened on The Tonight Show?" instead of, "Did you hear what Johnny Carson said last night on The Tonight Show?" The monologues have expanded greatly for Jay Leno, and the shows have become more about comedy. But in Johnny's day, as funny as he was, and as how certainly that's how we remember his legacy as one of the great comedic minds, he was a great listener, and probably, I would have to say, and I think if Jay Leno joined us right now, a better interviewer than Jay Leno, a better interviewer than David Letterman, because he listened and he let the guests be a bigger part of the show. There were a lot more guests. Remember when this started, it was 2 hours, then it was cut to 90 minutes, and finally 60. The other thing that made him drastically different was that he allowed people to guest host for him. It took a bypass for David Letterman to allow that to happen. The environment is very, very different now, and this man held the reins at a time when he was the absolute king, got 4 and 5 times the ratings numbers that late night does now because it's become so split up with what's happening in cable and every place else. He was the king, and frankly, when he left NBC, I thought he would sort of take over Bob Hope's role in terms of having NBC specials occasionally, and perhaps show up some more at the Oscars than he did. I was sorry to see that he didn't, but he seemed to be very happy living with Alexis there in Malibu, and was seen very recently. You know, I was so stunned by this because I saw a picture of him from about 2 weeks ago where he had gone to see The Aviator. Motion picture. You know, everyone calls him a recluse. He got around Malibu. I mean, he went out to dinner there.
So
Wolfgang Puck has a restaurant there. Yeah, he was taken care of by people around there who didn't bother him. And he was not Howard Hughes at the end. I want to make that point.
This is a Fox News alert. The king of late night has passed away. Johnny Carson died early this morning from emphysema at the age of 79. He got an early jump in his entertaining career as a magician. At the age of 14, back then he was called the Great Carsoni. He was in a number of radio and television shows throughout the years until he took a job that would become his legacy. Back in 1962, he took over the reins of The Tonight Show from host Jack Paar. He kept people laughing for 3 long decades. Johnny Carson leaves behind his wife, Alexis, and his sons. Let me just read the lead line of Associated Press because it puts it so wonderfully. Johnny Carson, the Tonight Show host who served America a smooth nightcap of celebrity banter, droll comedy, and heartland charm for 30 years, has died.
Wonder, because aside from the beautiful voices...
And you know, there are a couple of things that we haven't mentioned that we should let people know about. Johnny Carson was a good patriot. He served in the Navy, the U.S. Navy, from 1943 to 1946. So that's, you know, he was definitely a patriotic guy. We saw that in his shows. Also, something else, and a lot of people are, there's a bit of a confusion on this. Johnny Carson, in fair to Iowans, was born in Corning, Iowa in 1925, but then was raised in Nebraska, which I guess became his home and where he went to school. The other thing is his life, his personal life. There was some tragedy in it. He lost his son back in, I believe it was 1991. His son was killed in a road accident, and then obviously he was married 4 times and battled the bottle. So his personal life wasn't quite as perfect as his professional life, but it never seemed to get in the way.
Well, and it was always fodder for the tabloids. Bill McCuddy's here with us as well. And you know, Bill, I don't know if you were listening to our conversation with Jerry Lewis. But,
I was.
But it was Jerry pointed out, it was the way that Johnny confronted it openly and with self-deprecating humor, made light of it, and as a result, it really resonated with
I wouldn't say that he welcomed it. I wouldn't say that he looked for it. But when it came to him and it was presented, he knew the opportunity was there to be a human being and say, yes, this is my 4th wife. Yes, this is what's happening. And I invested in the DeLorean Motor Company. Do you remember John DeLorean? And then got stopped on Sunset Boulevard because I didn't have the proper license tags. So he would make comedy fodder of everything that came across his desk. And as recently as a few weeks ago, Peter LaSalle, who was with him for years and now works with David Letterman, said the only thing Johnny Carson missed every morning was the monologue, that he would look at the newspaper every morning and say, boy, this would be a great joke now for, and he would write it down, and through Peter LaSalle, he would get it, we are told, to David Letterman, and every now and then, Dave Letterman, who has a huge staff of writers of his own, would use a Johnny Carson joke, and according to Peter LaSalle, it was a big, big charge for Johnny to hear Letterman, who he adored, by the way. If he had been allowed to pick a successor, it's likely that it would have been David Letterman over Jay Leno. And so he was supplying material to David Letterman, a little-known piece of trivia, until very nearly the end.
Do you think it was because both men had such quick wits. I remember an interview that Johnny Carson did with a wife of Arnold Palmer, Winnie Palmer. He got into trouble. You remember this?
Sure.
I won't repeat the line, but it was lightning quick, and it was classic Carson, and that was what was so great about
Well, you know,
it.
we're not going to say the punchline to that joke because today it's a little politically incorrect and it's a little coarse, but
Right.
Johnny could get away with it. He was Peck's bad boy, to bring up another old term. I mean, he was a guy that could really get away with a double entendre. You know, remember the famous time that he had Dolly Parton on, and she was starting to talk about her breasts, and he said, couldn't I just sneak a little peek under there? I mean, it was done so naively and so with that boyish Nebraskan charm that he got away with it, and everyone laughed. I mean, he never really had an uncomfortable moment on camera, and he had an incredible life. Let's look back now at Johnny Carson. He was how America said goodnight. For 30 years, Johnny Carson dominated the air with big stars and big ratings.
Figured